One of the biggest challenges an organization can face is management of outsourced supplies or supply chain risk management. This module, we're going to talk about SCRM or supply chain risk management and how the RMF is in place to help you tackle the challenges of outsourced supply management. This module covers supply chain risk management as it relates to the RMF. Over time, more and more organizations have become reliant on external parties to help accomplish their daily mission and goals. Organizations are becoming increasingly reliant on products, systems, and services provided by external providers. Organizations are responsible and accountable for the risks incurred when using such component products, systems, and services. Relationships with external providers can be established in a variety of ways. For example, through joint ventures, business partnership, and various forms of formal agreements or outsourcing agreements. It's important to remember that when you're building an information system or you're developing systems for an organization, when you outsource components, you are still responsible for the risk incurred. This includes when the organization outsources different functions to third parties. The growing dependence on products, systems, and services from external providers, along with the nature of relationships with those providers, present an increasing amount of risk to an organization. It's important to understand that when we outsource components, functions, or systems and services to a third party, we must understand the risk that's going to be developed by using that partnership. Risk may increase based on the likelihood of occurrence and adverse impacts from threat events such as the insertion of counterfeits, unauthorized production, tampering, theft, insertion of malicious software and hardware, as well as poor manufacturing and the development practices in the supply chain, including the failure to build in security or privacy capabilities that enable an organization to better manage risk in its environment. When we outsource things, we're dependent on that third-party provider to do the things we ask them to do. This is different than if we build a system or software in-house. If we're building it in-house, we can ensure that those controls are in place, that the products we use are verified as original and counterfeits are not being used, and that malicious code or malicious pieces of hardware are not implemented in the system. This is harder to control when we outsource these services and system development. Supply chain risk can be endemic or systemic within a system element, system, organization, sector, or nation. While the singular use of a system element or service within a system may present an acceptable level of risk to the organization, its common or extended use throughout a system, organization, or sector, or nation can raise the risk to an unacceptable level. So what we're saying here is if we're using the supply chain to outsource a small portion of our processing or a small system or a limited set of third-party use, that may be an acceptable level of risk. But when we extend that throughout the organization or throughout a sector or across the nation, that risk may be elevated to an unacceptable level just based on the volume of outsourcing we're doing. These risks are often associated with the global and distributed nature of product and service supply chains and an organization's decreased visibility into and understanding of how the technology that they acquire is developed, integrated, and deployed. This includes the processes, procedure, and practices used to ensure the integrity, security, resilience, privacy capabilities, and quality of the acquired products, systems, and services. We have less visibility into a product that's being developed by a third-party outsourced supplier than we do within our own system, within our own environment, within our own organization. To address supply chain risks, the organizations develop an SCRM policy or supply chain risk management policy, which is an important vehicle for directing SCRM activities. Guided and informed by applicable laws, executive orders, directives, policies, and regulations, the SCRM policy supports applicable organizational policies. The policies address the goals and objectives in the organization's strategic plan, mission and business functions, and the internal and external customer requirements. By developing a policy, we have a written, developed set of requirements that we can levy on our third-party and supply chain partners to ensure that systems and applications are developed with the required security and privacy components in place. SCRM, SDLC, and risk management. This defines the integration points for SCRM with the risk management and the system development lifecycle processes for the organization. Supply chain risk management policy defines the SCRM roles and responsibilities within the organization, any dependencies among those roles, and the impact among those roles. The SCRM roles specify the responsibilities for procurement, conducting risk assessments, collecting supply chain threat intelligence, identifying and implementing risk-based mitigations, and performing monitoring functions. We need to apply the same risk management strategies to our third-party suppliers and the supply chain risk management process to ensure that we're meeting all of the requirements as if the system was built internally. Both FISMA and OMB A130 require that external providers handling federal information or operating systems on behalf of the federal government meet the same security and privacy requirements as federal agencies. Security and privacy requirements for external providers, including the controls for systems processing, storing, or transmitting federal information, are expressed in contracts or other formal agreements. The RMF can be effectively used to manage supply chain risk. In this statement, we're saying that the requirements laid out by OMB and FISMA law define that external suppliers meet the same security requirements and privacy requirements as the organization that's paying to have the system or application developed. We need to make sure this is built into contracts and other formal agreements when we outsource systems and application development. Contextual view. Every step in the RMF can be executed by non-federal external providers except the authorized step. That is, the acceptance of risk is an inherent federal responsibility for which senior executives are held responsible and accountable. That acceptance of risk cannot be delegated to others within the organization or to third parties. The acceptance of risk remains a purely federal responsibility assumed by the authorizing official. The authorization decision is directly linked to the management of risk related to the acquisition and use of component products, systems, and services from external providers. Also requires organizations to develop and implement supply chain risk management plans. The conceptual view of the system in this figure guide and inform security, privacy, and risk management activities for all elements of the supply chain. Managing supply chain risk is a complex, multifaceted undertaking requiring a coordinated effort across the organization, building trust relationships, and communicating with both internal and external stakeholders. Supply chain risk management activities involve identifying and assessing applicable risk, determining appropriate mitigating actions, and developing appropriate supply chain risk management plans to document selected mitigation actions and monitoring performance against SCRM or supply chain risk management plans. So we have to define the plan and assess our third parties against that plan and those requirements. Tailored SCRM. Because supply chains differ across and within organizations, supply chain risk management plans are tailored to an individual program, organization, and operational context. Tailored plans provide the basis for determining whether a system is fit for purpose, and as such, the controls needed to be tailored accordingly. Tailored SCRM plans help organizations to focus their resources on the most critical missions and business functions based on mission and business requirements and their risk environment. In this case, we're ensuring that the correct level of controls and the correct level of mitigations are put in place commensurate with the level of risk the system will introduce to the organization. We provide more controls to those systems that introduce more risk to the organization than those systems that introduce a lesser level of risk to the organization. This is how we tailor the SCRM. We determine the risk that the third-party relationship will introduce to the organization and implement plans for control implementation accordingly. External providers and insurance level. The determination that risk from acquiring products, systems, or services from external providers is acceptable depends on the level of assurance that the organization can gain from the providers. The level of assurance is based on the degree of control the organization can exert on the external provider regarding the controls needed for the protection of the product, system, or service, and the evidence brought forth by the provider as to the effectiveness of the controls. So as a customer of the supplier, we can require that a level of assurance is implemented in the system or application. This includes the evidence that controls are implemented within that system or application. The degree of control is established by specific terms and conditions of the contract or service level agreement. Some organizations have extensive control through contract vehicles or other agreements that specify the security and privacy requirements for the external provider. Other organizations, in contrast, have limited control because they are purchasing commodity services or off-the-shelf products. That's saying if we're building a custom application or a custom system, we're having a third party develop a custom system for us, we're going to have more control over that, and consequently it's going to cost more money than if we purchase something off the shelf, because the off-the-shelf product, we won't have the same level of ability to customize or assess that product. However, normally that'll come at a lower cost. That convince the organization that the requisite controls have been implemented and that a credible determination of control effectiveness exists. Ultimately, the responsibility for responding to risk from the use of component products, systems, and services from external providers remains with the organization and the AO, or the authorizing official. Organizations require that an appropriate chain of trust be established with external providers when dealing with the issues associated with system security or privacy risks. That is, we want to make sure that the supplier we're using processes that application or system and is directly in line with our organization, and we don't travel through unneeded fourth, fifth, or sixth parties as the system is developed. In all cases, responsibility for risk remains with the organization and cannot be transferred to the third-party supplier. SCRM strategies and plans. Organizations have flexibility on how the details of supply chain risk management strategies and plans are documented. SCRM strategy details for levels 1 and 2 can be documented in the Information Security Program Plan for the organization, or in a separate organization level and or mission business process level SCRM strategy. SCRM plan details for level 3 can be documented in the Information System Security Plan or in a separate system level SCRM plan. An SCRM strategy template is provided in Special Publication 800-161 for your use. That's saying we can develop an organization level SCRM plan, or we can have separate mission, business, and organizational level SCRM plans for the organization. That's up to the organization to determine. And the system owner, the same way, can have the SCRM plans documented in the SSP or the System Security Plan, or they could develop a separate SCRM plan for their system. Again, that's up to the system owner and the organization to determine the best way to to build their strategies and plans. In closing, this topic covered a lot of items, including the following: resilience on external providers, products, systems, and services, supply chain risks, SCRM, SDLC, and risk management, FISMA and OMB requirements, the contextual view of SCRM, managing supply chain risk, tailored SCRM, external providers assurance levels, degree of control, assurance level factors, and SCRM strategies and plans. If any of these topics look unfamiliar to you, I suggest you go back and watch the video again, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you.